Hello everybody, this is Connor at BoatsDon'tSink, here with another Shadowverse Evolve deck profile. This time we're going to be looking at the Aggro Sword deck from BP06. As always, before we take a look at the list, this is just meant to be a starting point. Lots of 3-ofs, very basic, not a whole lot of tech options, so feel free to play around with it, adjust the ratios, and try out cards that you think fit your playstyle or your meta better. So, as I said, lots of 3-ofs here. This is a lot of familiar cards. There are 3 cards we're playing from BP06. Everything else is pretty typical to what the Aggro Sword decks have looked like in the past. A few cards that we haven't seen before, at least on this channel. But the basic strategy is still mostly the same as it's always been for this kind of deck. We've just added a little more speed in the early game and a little more longevity in the late game, but it is still very much a all offense, very little defense, kind of glass cannony aggro deck, with just hopefully the sheer card quantity and numbers on our cards to beat through the opponent and get them to 0 before it matters. As always, you can check out the deck log page using the code in the bottom right. It's going to be 2XQTA. Or you can use the link in the description. Our Evo deck's pretty simple as well. One of the biggest things you can change right off the bat, if you'd like, is the Oathless Knight and Mock Knight Evo counts. Those can very easily go the other direction for 1 Oathless Knight and 2 Mock Knights, just depending on which one you think you'll use more. Unfortunately, because of the Leonidas, we can't just run 2 of everything. So, looking at our curve, we got 11 1s, 9 2s, 15 3s, and 5 6s. So we're pretty much just a 1-2-3 deck, and then start playing combinations of those cards. All of our 6s are kind of just there to close out the game. Leonidas obviously making our bodies just massive for the later turns of the game in the control matchups. And Courtly Dance, kind of a hand refill that just puts everything on board instead of hand. So it's a heroic entry plus if you want to think about it that way. Heroic Entry and the Courtly Dance are only 6 spells. Everything else is followers. The strategy of the deck is real simple. We're just trying to curve out, play the best 1-drop, best 2-drop, best 3-drop, and keep going from there with whatever combination of cards is in our hand. Ideally, being Swordcraft, the numbers printed on our cards will just be better than our opponent and more than they can deal with, because we're definitely not winning in the utility and card advantage if removal effect areas. We just got to be better numbers than our opponent. But a lot of our cards will help us do that pretty consistently. Looking at our 1-drops, we start off with Ironwrought Defender. This is one of many 1-drop 2/2s in Sword. We choose to play this one, not really because of its fanfare effect, though that can come up in the mid to late game, but more because it is a heroic card for some of our other heroic effects. The other heroic cards we play are Mock Knight and Heroic Entry. Ideally, we're not summoning this off Heroic Entry just to get the +1/+1, but Mock Knight itself has an on-evolve effect that checks for 2 heroic cards in Cemetery, and choosing Ironwrought Defender as our 1-drop 2/2 lets us achieve that a little easier. Mock Knight and Heroic Entry both, of course, will also count towards Ironwrought Defender's fanfare if we do end up playing them in the late game. Sometimes being able to get the 1-drop 2/3 ward in the late game can be relevant, especially if you've resolved a Leonidas amulet. You can get a 1-drop 5/6 ward in the late game, which can be pretty good against things like Kuon, where you can stabilize against their D-shift turns. Next, we have Kagamitsu, Matchless Blade. This is one of the new cards we play from BP06. He is a 1-cost 1/1 officer with Rush. Fanfare, give this follower +X/+X, where X equals the number of face-up evolved followers in your evolved deck. If X is at least 3, give it a Sail. If X is at least 7, give it Strike. Refresh this follower once per turn. So we're generally never really going for the 7. I know when they were revealing these cards on the official social media channels, one of the things they posted was, oh, you can play Kagamitsu as a 10/10 with 9 face-up evos, and then give it Storm with the Uma Musume spell and attack twice for just like 20 damage out of nowhere, which is cool. It's really funny for 3 play points. However, it's unrealistic for the game to go long enough for you to have that many face-up evolves. Generally, this guy's going to be coming down as like a 1-drop 3/3 or maybe a 1-drop 4/4, but that is still above rate for a 1-drop. And he has Rush on top of that, so that's really all we need. Even if he's a 1-drop 2/2 with Rush, it's more text than a 1-drop 2/2 normally has. So he's really just an over-spec officer, as long as we're not playing him on like turn 1 or 2. The Assail can be pretty relevant once we're at 3 face-up evos, since he can use 4 attack to trade into things that our opponent doesn't want to engage, which can help keep us alive, help clear out just big threats that are going to trade into like multiple of our bodies. The deck does have, of course, a lot of early game evos that it's going to be going through in like turns 2, 3, 4. So Kagamitsu will scale up pretty quick. He's also a really good target to get off of Mars, since he only costs 1 and he is an officer. The Mars evo can pay 1 to search him out. And if you already have a few face-up evos, paying 1 for your Mars to get you like a 4/3 or a 5/4 can be quite powerful. Especially since, of course, the Rush lets him trade in as removal. And Mars paying 1 to like tutor a Witch Bolt essentially is really good. Our next 1-drop is Quick Blader. This is a card that kind of pops in and out of the sword decks just depending on how the meta is going. Right now, with the popularity of like the D-Shift deck and Control Abyss, and I've seen a handful of people talking about Control Haven as well. 1 defense on a Storm Body is a little sketchy, but we need 1-drops in this deck, and because we're playing Mars, this card has a lot of good interactions with Mars, which I think make it worth playing as our 1-drop of choice. It is the cheapest officer that also has Storm. It's the only 1-drop. I believe the only like 1-drop card that just has Storm that we can play in this deck. So being able to evolve Mars and pay 1 to get a 2/1 Storm can let us sort of cheat in a little bit of damage here and there when our opponent wouldn't be expecting it. Especially if we go first and can just on turn 4 play a Mars Evo, get a Quick Blader, hit our opponent for 2. They have 2 bodies they have to answer, and they're probably still in the stage of the game where they're curving out and aren't holding up removal for something like that. So pretty good there. Later in the game, it can also just be something good to get off like Courtly Dance to cheat in a little bit of extra damage and fill up our board for Ralmia evos. So decent card in this deck all around. But you could swap it out for something with a little higher stat line if you'd prefer. None of the 1-drops are really going to be living removal though, so I don't think it's that important to do so. Last up, we have 2 copies of Swordsman. This is a 1-drop 2/1. This card's seen a lot of play since set 1 as well. This one you could also very easily go with like another 2/2 or something in this last slot. However, I think Swordsman is worth having just for things like aggro mirrors, where maybe our opponent has a big reserved body that we want to be able to swing something into and remove, just to sort of stay ahead on board. Alternatively, since we are playing Leonidas, it is a way that we can help sort of guarantee that our Leonidas has something to crash into, which can be pretty relevant for some of like the control matchups, some of the later game matchups, where we really want that Leonidas amulet to be able to get like inevitability on our opponent and just provide numbers that they can't clear as easily. Moving into our 2-drops, we're playing Fina, Dynamite Daredevil. This is the only follower in this deck that is not Swordcraft, meaning we cannot grab it off Heroic Entry or Courtly Dance. It doesn't get buffed by the Leonidas Resolve. So, unfortunate there that it sort of conflicts with a lot of our strategies, but I think this card is powerful enough that it's worth playing anyway. 2-drop 3/2 Fanfare, choose one of the following. Option 1, we can look at the top 5 cards of our deck to add a cost 1 follower and bottom deck the rest. Option 2, we can destroy an enemy cost 1 follower. So obviously being able to grab extra 1 costs, just like play a 1-drop on turn 1, play this on turn 2, go get another 1-drop, lets us do things like turn 3 1-drop Ralmia Evo. If we have, if our opponent didn't remove any of our bodies, which is pretty good. It just helps us keep finding things to play. Alternatively, what I think is potentially even more powerful is option 2. The scenarios where you get to go first and play a 1-drop, and then your opponent plays a 1-drop, and then your turn 2 is play Fina to pop their 1-drop. You now have 5 attack on board to your opponent's 0, and whatever they play turn 2 is not likely to be able to remove either of your bodies, since there aren't that many 2-drop Evos seeing play, which means that you're really just like 6 or 7 damage ahead on your opponent by the time they can actually start removing your bodies. Sometimes that's just enough to win the game on its own, and I think that makes Fina a pretty valuable card to have for like aggro mirrors. So I think she's worth having in the deck. Despite not interacting super well with a lot of our other cards, she just interacts well with our strategy as a whole, and 3 attack is great in an aggro deck. And of course, we have a lot of 1-drops to grab if you do have to go with that mode. In the slower matchups, like you're playing against control decks, you're very likely not going to have a 1-drop to blow up. So we have our 11 1-drops to grab off this. You're pretty likely to hit one. If you don't hit one, it's not the end of the world, but it's nice to find them. Oathless Knight is our next 2-drop. This is a card that really hasn't seen any play since set 1, but I think it's quite good in this deck. It's a 2-drop 1/1, which is pretty small stat line, but it makes another 1/1 token on Fanfare. It makes a Knight token. 2 cost for a 2/2 is still a little below average, but because some of this deck cares about how wide we can go, it's more valuable than a lot of the other options we have. And he can evolve, which we'll look at in a second. But the biggest thing here is similar to Quickblader being a 1-drop that we can get off of Mars. Oathless Knight is a 2-cost follower that we can get off of Mars. He is an officer, and the token he makes is an officer, which means that if we're paying 2 for a Mars to get this guy, we're getting 4/2 of stats for 2 play points, which does start to be pretty above rate. And since it's split across 2 bodies, it is a little more difficult for our opponent to answer than just a regular 4/2 that would die to an Angelic Snipe. So this card sort of plays a niche role as being the best 2-drop Mars target, as well as being a 2-drop that makes 2 bodies that we can curve into like Ralmia plays going into turns 3 and 4. The Evo for 1 puts us as a 3/1 Assail. It's pretty unique, just gaining 2 attack instead of attack and defense. Makes him very good at just removing untapped followers. He's a 4/1 if you play him with a Mars on board, which can just instantly trade into any kind of like 4/4 Evo that's untapped. It's good for taking out like Alice, Dragon Warriors, Draconeers, Rose Gardeners, like whatever stuff like that. So pretty solid stat line, and Assail is a nice keyword to have. Next up is the probably most important new card we got in terms of just aggro strategy. Ralmia Sonic Racer is a 2-cost 3/2, so already good aggressive stat line, same as Fina. It costs 1 less to evolve for every other follower on your field, so her base evolve cost is 3, meaning if we have 3 other followers, she's going to cost 0 to evolve. That is really where we want to try to be getting with her. She also has Rush, so worst case scenario, she's a 2-drop that you can play and just crash into something as removal. Ideally, you don't want to be doing that, though, because she is one of our best sources of damage. Also, notably, she is an officer, so she will be getting buffed off of Mars. Almost everything in this deck will. The Evo, once we pay, hopefully, 0 for it, puts her as a 4/3 with Storm, which, for a 2-drop that evolves for 0, 4/3 Storm is insanely powerful. She also has an on-evolve effect. You can pay 3 to give her +1/+1 for every other follower on your field. So if we're turn 5 or beyond, and you are evolving her for 0, you'll have the play points to pay 3 and get +3/+3, or even +4/+4 potentially, making her a 7/6 or an 8/7, which 5 points for like 7/6 Storm is really just everything this deck could ever want, especially when she has the flexibility of also being a 2-drop. And that's why we play so many cards in this deck that are able to make multiple bodies off of like 1 card. Oathless Knight making Knight tokens, Floral Fencer making 2 tokens, and Courtly Dance, the last new card we play, being able to get us up to like 4 followers into play off of its effect to just sort of instantly turn on a Ralmia. So this is definitely the most powerful Storm card we now have access to, and is how we'll be chunking our opponent for forte levels of damage in a lot of games. Floral Fencer, this card is just never going away, I think. 3-drop 3/3 Evo for 1 into a 4/4, and on evolve it makes a Knight and a Steelclad Knight. It's a 1/1 and a 2/2. This card is just so much value. Obviously, it's been seeing play since set 1. It's pretty much never come out of any of the sword decks. 7/7 stats on 4 going first or 3 even going second. It's just way too much for most decks to be able to answer. Really, like, I can't think of anything that can actually answer all 3 bodies on curve. So it's just the most powerful play that we have at that point. And it's very good at setting up Ralmia turns, since it makes so many bodies that are hard to answer. And very good in the later games. Once we have like Leonidas Amulet up, it just makes, 4/4, 5/5, and 7/7 all at once. It essentially wins us the game once it resolves. Gemstaff Commander, we're playing 3 of. This is probably the slowest card in the deck that we're playing. Since it doesn't have Rush, it doesn't evolve, it can't really do anything the turn it comes down, but I think it's still important enough to have. It has 3 attack, which is good, and it can search us things like Leonidas or Mars or Ralmia to set up very specific plays that we can sort of plan to curve into. Because a lot of this deck is just based off of what our opening hand looks like and what we're drawing the first couple turns of the game. Gemstaff can be used to sort of fill any holes in that, to make sure that our curve can extend out a little bit further and hit the things that we want to be hitting. This is especially important in the longer, grindier matchups where you will need Leonidas to win. This is the card that's going to be finding it for you, unless you just happen to draw it in your opening hand. Mock Knight is another 3-drop that we're playing. 3-drop 3/3 Fanfare. If this card is put into your field from anywhere other than your hand, it gains Storm. We have 3 ways to do that. We can either get it off of the Mars Evolve by paying 3. We can get it off of Heroic Entry, which is probably the best way to get it, since it gets +1/+1. Or we can get it off of Courtly Dance, which is essentially the same thing as Heroic Entry, just for our later game strategies. Ideally, if we're playing this, it's getting Storm. But if not, it can still evolve for 1 into a 4/4 that deals 2 damage on evolve. If we have at least 2 heroic cards in Cemetery, it deals 4 instead. So if we played Iron Rot Defender on turn 1, that's probably going to be 1 card in Cemetery. And if we're able to get this off of Heroic Entry, that will immediately fulfill the condition for us to deal 4 damage. And if you do get it off Heroic Entry and can evolve it, having a 5/5 that can swing in, potentially on like turn 3 going second, is very powerful. Can help you climb back into the game in the matchups where you do have to go second. So a really strong card overall. If you have to hard play it from hand, you're at least getting removal. But if you're able to cheat it in off of an effect, having Storm really lets you sort of punish your opponent for you high rolling. The last 3-drop follower we play is Mars Silent Flame General. This is a 3-drop 3/2. Whenever an officer follower is put onto your field, give it +1 attack. That is essentially our whole deck. The only cards we play that are not officers are Fina, Gemstaff Commander, and Leonidas. And of course Mars herself. Everything else is an officer, and all of the tokens that we make are officers. So they're all going to be getting +1. It makes Mars a really powerful card to just stick on board. Because whatever you play on the following turn, for example, you go first, a Mars on 3 into a Floral Fencer on 4. Now, instead of a 1/1, 2/2, 3/3, you have a 2/1, 3/2. I'm sorry, instead of a 1/1, 2/2, 4/4, you have a 2/1, 3/2, 5/4. So you're now getting 10/7 of stats, which that's, of course, half of someone's life total. They really have to find a way to answer everything quickly. It can just make your boards really threatening really quick. Has great synergy with Courtly Dance because you're getting multiple bodies at once. So everything that comes in off of it will Mars will see them and be able to buff all of them. So just great card overall for making good numbers. It also evolves for 0 into a 4/3, which actually makes it a decent play on 3 going first, because you can just evolve it immediately and have something that's essentially overstat. You just won't be able to use the on-evolve effect. For the later turns, where you do get to use the on-evolve effect, you can pay X to search your deck for an officer follower that costs X play points or less, and put it onto your field. X is a number of your choice. So the way this deck is constructed, we actually have really good targets for pretty much every part of our curve. If we play this on 4, we can pay 1 to get Quick Blader. 5, we can pay 2 to get Oathless Knight. 6, we can pay 3 to get Mock Knight. And all of those cards are great to bring off of it. They're all officers, so they'll get pumped. Quick Blader will be a 2/1 Storm on 4. Oathless Knight will give us 4/2 of stats on 5. And then Mock Knight will give us a 4/3 Storm on 6. So they're all just great cards to get off of it. Makes Mars really flexible. A pretty valuable card to just draw at any point of the game. And of course, since she's able to produce just multiple bodies off of her effect, a very powerful card to draw after we've set up Leonidas. The last 3-cost card we play is, of course, Heroic Entry, 3-cost Spell. Look at the top 4 cards of your deck. Put a Swordcraft follower that costs 3 or less onto your field. If it's heroic, it gets +1/+1, and then the rest of the cards go to the bottom of your deck in any order. So we have a lot of 3-drop or less followers. It's basically our whole deck. The ones that we really want to see, Mock Knight, since we can give it Storm and the +1/+1. It's definitely the most powerful play we have. However, if you're going second, Floral Fencer is also perfectly fine, since you can bring it in and evolve it immediately, and just make that wide board. It's essentially copies 4 through 6 of Heroic Entry, or of Floral Fencer, sorry. If you can play Heroic Entry, just gives you more chances to find it. The kind of worst case scenario is if you hit Gemstaff Commander, since it's not going to do anything immediately on board, but it's still basically the same as you having just played a 3-drop, which is perfectly fine. It's just a little slower for you. Moving into our late game options, these are for really just closing out the game in longer matchups where our burst aggro wasn't good enough. Matchups where our opponent might have had like too many wards or just too much removal for us. We have Leonidas, of course, kind of a staple finisher for Sword since set 2. He's a 6-drop 5/6 that evolves for 1. He evolves into a 6/7. On evolve, you select an enemy follower, deal 5 to it and 5 to Leonidas. So this puts Leonidas down to 2 defense, but that's perfectly fine because he has last words, summon a Leonidas' resolve token. So our goal here is to put him down to 6/2 and then crash him into something else to trade. So he's double removal. He clears himself off, but he leaves us with an amulet that says whenever a Swordcraft follower is put onto your field, give it +3/+3 and rush. This now means that every card we play is just like at double its stat line minimum. You bring in a Floral Fencer, you now get, of course, like 4/4, 5/5, 7/7, which is what, 16/16 of stats. Like, that's just, your opponent's not going to be able to clear that without like a Themis Decree or something. So you basically win within a turn or two of resolving Leonidas here. It's great with all of our Storm cards. Cards like Ralmia can come in and just have 10 attack out of nowhere. It's really good with the Courtly Dance, the next card we'll look at, since that puts multiple bodies into play at once. They can all get the Leonidas' resolve boost, and create boards that are just pretty much impossible to answer. So Courtly Dance is a 6-cost spell from BP06. Look at the top 5 cards of your deck. From among them, you may summon any number of Swordcraft followers that cost 3 or less each, up to a total cost of 7. Put the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order. So obviously the 3 or less cost part is pretty easy. That's anything that's not Leonidas. The total cost of 7 can be a little awkward, but because we play a fairly even spread of 1, 2, and 3 cost followers, you should be able to get like 2 2s and a 3, or 2 1s, a 2 and a 3, something like that pretty easily, or even just like 2 3s and a 1. It shouldn't be hard to make that math work out. Ideal scenario is that you're hitting a Ralmia and 3 other followers, and you can just immediately evolve the Ralmia. Something like Mock Knight, Ralmia, Oathless Knight gets you a 0 cost Ralmia evolved, so you can hit for 3 with the Mock Knight and 4 with the Ralmia immediately. You could hit something like Iron Rot Defender, Quick Blader, Ralmia, Mock Knight is kind of like best case scenario where you're just hitting for a billion damage off all your storms that you're getting. If you can hit something like that with a Leonidas Resolve in play, you probably just win on the spot. That's, I don't know, how much damage is that? That's what, like, 7 plus 6, 13, 7. That's 17 damage. Like, it kind of just wins you the game on the spot here. Even in the scenarios where you're not doing that, Courtly Dance just getting you 3 or 4 bodies is incredibly powerful. For 1 card out of your hand. It kind of just keeps you in the game once you've already run out all the rest of your resources. So looking at the deck as a whole, I think this is a pretty powerful aggro deck. If you watch my tier list, I had it tier 2. I think it only falls behind sort of the really unfair decks and the really good control decks. Some of the pros, you have multiple cards that turn it into multiple bodies, which makes your opponent's removal inefficient. When you're doing things like Oathless Knight and Floral Fencer, all of a sudden 1 removal spell does not answer the 1 card you played. They're having to spend multiple cards to answer them, which means ideally they'll run out of removal before you run out of bodies. We also have multiple sources of good storm damage between Quick Blader, Ralmia, and Mock Knight. It's not as much as some other sword lists are going to have, but it's still enough to help us close out the game sometimes. And Leonidas provides us with great inevitability. Despite the fact that this is an aggro deck, some games will inevitably go to turn 6 or 7, and Leonidas is going to be your saving grace there. Some cons of the deck, we have limited card advantage to refuel after we play out our hand. While our cards do make multiple bodies, and our goal is to play 1 card a turn, sometimes you end up having to play like multiple 1-drops or 1 and 2 drops in a turn once you get to turns 3, 4, 5. And if you do that, you have very few ways to draw cards back to your hand. Mars searching something and Gemstaff Commander searching something, and Fina, I guess, adding 1-drops are kind of all you have. And even those are usually just going straight to the board and not really building your hand back up. We also have very limited defensive options. Iron Rot Defender is our only ward or source of life gain here. So in aggro matchups, we really are just racing them to the finish and hoping that our numbers are bigger than theirs to get them to 0 before they get us to 0. This can be very awkward when we have to go second, if we're already behind on board and our opponent is playing similar cards to us. Things like Fina can really set us behind and kind of lock us out of the game early, unfortunately. So here's the list as a whole again. As usual, you can use that decklog code in the bottom or the link in the description, 2XQTA, to check out that decklog page. Maybe do some copy and edit, make some changes of your own. Got the Evo deck. Like I said, the Mock Knight, Oathless Knight can swap pretty easily if you'd rather have the damage-based removal from a second Mock Knight Evo. Otherwise, I think this deck's pretty sweet. I think Sword is really powerful in this set. It's very straightforward, linear aggro game plan with just really big numbers to support it, which I think is always going to be good, especially in these wide formats where there's a lot of viable decks and you're not really sure which ones you're going to run into. Thank you for watching, of course. I'll have some more deck profiles coming out soon. Let me know which ones you'd like to see in the comments. Give me your thoughts on this deck. Until the next one comes out, there should be some videos on the screen for you to watch now. Otherwise, I will see you next time.